So we're back, part 2, recorded in the same day. I'm sweating because I'm sitting next to the fire and it's literally 1,000,000,000 degrees. But we're reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. We are on page 181 at the bottom, if you're following along. Cassie Logan. Yes'm, Miss Crocker. That's the third time I've caught you daydreaming this morning. Just because you managed to come in first on the examinations last week doesn't mean a thing this week. We're in a new quarter and everyone's slate is clean. You'll make no A's by daydreaming. You understand that? Yes'm, I said, not bothering to add that she repeated herself so much that all a body had to do was listen to the first few times of her lesson to be free to daydream to her heart's content. I think you'd better sit in the back where you're not so comfortable, she said. Then maybe you'll pay more attention. But Miss Crocker raised her hand, indicating that she did not want to hear another word, and banished me to the very last row in front of the window. I slid into the cold seat after its former occupant had eagerly left it for my warm quarters by the stove. As soon as Miss Crocker turned away, I mumbled a few indignant phrases. Then, hugging my Christmas sweater to me, I tried to pay attention to Miss Crocker, but the cold creeping under the windowsill made it impossible. Unable to bear the draft, I decided to line the sill with paper from my notebook. I ripped out the paper, then turned to the window. As I did, a man passed under it and disappeared. The man was Caleb Wallace. I raised my hand. Miss Crocker, may I be excused? Please, ma'am. Well, you know. As soon as I had escaped Miss Crocker, I dashed to the front of the building. Caleb Wallace was standing in front of the 7th grade class building, talking to Mr. Wellever and 2 white men whom I couldn't make out from where I stood. When the men entered the building, I turned and sped to the rear and carefully climbed onto the woodpile stacked behind it. I peeked cautiously through the broken window into Mama's classroom. The men were just entering, Caleb Wallace first, followed by a man I didn't know, and then Mr. Harlan Granger. Mama seemed startled to see the men, but when Mr. Granger said, "Been hearing about your teaching, Mary, so as members of the school board, we thought we'd come by and learn something." She merely nodded and went on with her lessons. Mr. Wellever left the room, returning shortly with 3 folding chairs for the visitors. He himself remained standing. Mama was in the middle of history, and I knew that was bad. I could tell Stacy knew it too. He sat tense near the back of the room, his lips very tight, his eyes on the men. But Mama did not flinch. She always started her history class the first thing in the morning when the students were most alert, and I knew that hour was not yet up. To make matters worse, her lesson for the day was slavery. She spoke on the cruelty of it, of the rich economic cycle it generated as slaves produced the raw products for the factories of the North and Europe, how the country profited and grew from the free labor of people still not free. Before she had finished, Mr. Granger picked up a student's book, flipped it open to the pasted-over front cover, and pursed his lips. "Thought these books belonged to the county," he said, interrupting her. Mama glanced over at him, but did not reply. Mr. Granger turned the pages, stopped, and read something. "I don't see all them things you're teaching in here." "That's because they're not in here," Mama said. "Well, if it ain't in here, then you got no right teaching it. This book's approved by the Board of Education, and you're expected to teach what's in it." "I can't do that." "And why not?" Mama, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the men, answered, "Because all that's in that book isn't true." Mr. Granger stood. He laid the book back on the student's desk and headed for the door. The other board member and Caleb Wallace followed. At the door, Mr. Granger stopped and pointed at Mama. "You must be some kind of smart, Mary, to know more than the fellow who wrote that book. Smarter than the school board, too, I reckon." Mama remained silent, and Mr. Wellever gave her no support. "In fact," Mr. Granger continued, putting on his hat, "you so smart, I expect you'd best just forget about teaching altogether. Then, that-a-way, you'll have plenty of time to write your own book." With that, he turned his back on her, glanced at Mr. Welliver to make sure his meaning was clear, and left with the others behind him. We waited for Mama after school was out. Stacy had sent TJ and Claude on, and the four of us, silent and patient, were sitting on the steps when Mama emerged. She smiled down at us, seemingly not surprised that we were there. I looked up at her, but I couldn't speak. I had never really thought much about Mama's teaching before. That was just a part of her being Mama. But now that she could not teach, I felt resentful and angry, and I hated Mr. Granger. "You all know?" she asked. We nodded as she slowly descended the stairs. Stacy took one handle of her heavy black satchel and I took the other. Christopher John and Little Man each took one of her hands as we started across the lawn. "Mama," said Christopher John when we reached the road, "can't you ever teach no more?" Mama did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was muffled. "Somewhere else, maybe, but not here. At least, not for a while." "How's come?" "But how's come, Mama?" demanded Little Man. "How's come?" Mama bit into her lower lip and gazed at the road. "Because, baby," she said finally, "I taught things some folks just didn't want to hear." When we reached home, Papa and Mr. Morrison were both in the kitchen with Big Ma drinking coffee. As we entered, Papa searched our faces. His eyes settled on Mama. The pain was in her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Mama sat down beside him. She pushed back a strand of hair that had worked its way free of the chignon, but it fell back into her face again and she left it there. "I got fired." Big Ma put down her cup weakly without a word. Papa reached out and touched Mama. She said, "Harlan Granger came to the school with Caleb Wallace and one of the other school board members. Somebody had told them about those books I'd pasted over, but that was only an excuse. They're just getting at us any way they can because of shopping in Vicksburg." Her voice cracked. "What do we do, David? We need that job." Papa gently pushed the stray hair back over her ear. "We'll get by. Plant more cotton, maybe, but we'll get by." There was quiet reassurance in his voice. Mama nodded and stood. "Where are you going, child?" Big Ma asked. "Outside. I want to walk for a bit." Christopher John, Little Man, and I turned to follow her, but Papa called us back. "Leave your Mama be," he said. As we watched her slowly cross the backyard to the barren garden and head toward the south pasture, Mr. Morrison said, with you here, Mr. Logan, you got no need of me. Maybe there's work to be had round here. Maybe I could get something, help you out." Papa stared across at Mr. Morrison. "There's no call for you to do that," he said. "I'm not paying you anything as it is." Mr. Morrison said softly, "I got me a nice house to live in, the best cooking a man could want, and for the first time in a long time, I got me a family. That's right good pay, I'd say." Papa nodded. "You're a good man, Mr. Morrison, and I thank you for the offer, but I'll be leaving in a few weeks, and I'd rather you was here." His eyes focused on Mama again, a tiny figure in the distance now. "Papa," rasped Christopher John, moving close to him, "Mama gonna be all right?" Papa turned and putting his hands around Christopher John drew him even nearer. "Son, your Mama, she's born to teachin' like the sun is born to shine. And it's going to be hard on her not teaching anymore. It's going to be real hard, because ever since she was a wee bitty girl down in the Delta, she wanted to be a teacher. And Grandpa wanted her to be one too, didn't he, Papa?" said Christopher John. Papa nodded. "Your Mama was his baby child, and every penny he'd get his hands on, he'd put it aside for her schooling. And that wasn't easy for him either, because he was a tenant farmer, and he didn't see much cash money. But he'd promised your grandmama before she died to see that your Mama got an education, and when your Mama come high school age, he sent her up to Jackson to school, then on to teacher training school. It was just 'cause he died her last year of schooling that she come up on here to teach instead of going back to the Delta. And y'all got married, and she ain't gone back down there no more," interjected Little Man. Papa smiled faintly at little man and stood up. That's right, son. She was too smart and pretty to let get away. He stooped and looked out the window again, then back at us. She's a strong, fine woman, your mama, and this thing won't keep her down. But it's hurt her bad. So I want you all to be extra thoughtful for the next few days, and remember what I told you, you hear? Yes, sir, Papa, we answered. Papa left us then and went back onto the porch. There he leaned against the porch pillar for several minutes, staring out toward the pasture. Rhett, I'm reading, okay, on video? But after a while, he stepped into the yard and crossed the garden to join Mama. TJ, you sure? Stacy asked little Willie Wiggins at the recess the next day. Little Willie nodded morosely and answered, Heard it myself. Clarence, too, was standing right upside him at the store when he told Mr. Caleb, come talking about how Ms. Logan failed him on purpose, and then said she wasn't a good teacher and that she was the one that stopped everyone from coming up to their store, said she was even destroying school property, talking about them books, you know. Who's gonna take him? I cried. Hush, Cassie, said Stacy. How come you telling me this now, little Willie? Little Willie shrugged. Guess I got fooled by old TJ. Clarence and me. We told him we was going to tell it soon as we left the store, but TJ asked us not to do it. Said he was going right back and tell them it wasn't nothing, but a joke, what he said. And he went back too, and I thought nothing was going to come of it. He hesitated, then confessed. Didn't say nothing about it 'cause me and Clarence wasn't supposed to be up there ourselves. But then here come Mr. Granger yesterday and fires Miss Logan. I figure that's TJ's doing. He probably figured it too, I said. That's why he ain't in school today. Talking about he's sick, said Christopher John. If he ain't now, he gonna be, prophesied little man, his tiny fists balled for action. Round here tellin' on Mama. After school, when Claude turned up the forest trail leading to the Avery's house, we went with him. As we emerged from the forest into the Avery yard, the house appeared deserted. But then we spied TJ lazily swinging straddle-legged atop the inner tube hanging from the old oak in the front yard. Stacy immediately charged toward him, and when TJ saw him coming, he tried to swing his long right leg over the tube to escape, but he didn't make it. Stacy jumped up on the inner tube, giving them both a jerky ride before they landed hard on Miss Avery's azalea bush. Man, what's the matter with you? TJ cried as he rolled from under Stacy to glance back at the flattened bush. My mama's gonna kill me when she sees that bush. Stacy jumped up and jerked at TJ's collar. Was you the one? Did you do it? TJ looked completely bewildered. Do what? What you talking about? Did you tell it? You tell them Wallaces about Mama? Me? Asked TJ. Me? Why, man, you ought to know me better than that. He do know you, I said. How come you think we up here? Hey, wait now a minute, objected TJ. I don't know what somebody been telling y'all, but I ain't told them Wallaces nothing. You was down there, Stacy accused. The day Mama caught you cheating, you went down to them Wallaces. Well, that don't mean nothing, said TJ, jerking away from Stacy's grip and hopping to his feet. My daddy says I can go down there if I wanna. Don't mean I told them old folks nothing, though. Heard you told them all sorts of things, like Mama didn't know nothing and she wasn't even teaching what she was supposed to. Didn't neither, denied TJ. Ain't never said that. All I said was that it was her that... His voice trailed off as he realized he had said too much, and he began to laugh uneasily. Hey, look, y'all. I don't know how come Ms. Logan got fired, but I ain't said nothing to make nobody fire her. All I said was that she failed me again. A fellow got a right to be mad about something like that, ain't he? Stacy's eyes narrowed upon TJ. Maybe, he said, but he ain't got no right to go running his mouth off about things that ain't supposed to be told. TJ stepped backward and looked nervously over his shoulders to the south where the fields lay fallow. The rutted wagon trail which cut through the fields leading from the distant Granger mansion revealed a thin woman stepping briskly toward us. TJ seemed to take heart from the figure and grew cocky again. Don't know who's been telling, but it ain't been me. A moment's silence passed, and then Stacy, his eyes cold and condemning, said quietly, "It was you all right, TJ. It was you." Then turning, he motioned us back toward the forest. "Ain't you gonna beat him up?" cried a disappointed little man. "What he got coming to him is worse than a beating," replied Stacy. "What could be worse than that?" asked Christopher John. "You'll see," said Stacy, "and so will TJ." TJ's first day back at school after almost a week's absence was less than successful. Avoiding us in the morning, he arrived late, only to be shunned by the other students. At first, he pretended that the students' attitude didn't matter, but by the afternoon, when school was out, he hurried after us, attempting to convince us that he was merely a victim of circumstances. "Hey, y'all, ain't gonna hold what little Willie said against me, are you?" he asked. "You still saying that what little Willie said ain't true?" questioned Stacy. "Why, shoot, yeah," he exclaimed. "When I catch up with that little rascal, I'm gonna beat him to a pulp, round here telling everybody I got Ms. Logan fired. Ain't nobody even speaking to me no more. Little Willie probably told them Wallaces that hisself, so he figures to get it off of him by telling everybody it was—" "Oh, stop lying, TJ," I said testily. "Don't nobody believe you." "Well, I should have known you wouldn't, Cassie. You never liked me nohow. No way." "Well, anyway, that's the truth," I agreed. "But," said TJ, grinning again and turning toward Little Man and Christopher John, "my little buddy Christopher John believes me, don't you, fellow? And you still my pal, ain't you, Little Man?" An indignant Little Man looked up at TJ, but before he could speak, easygoing Christopher John said, "You told on Mama, TJ. Now she's all unhappy because she can't teach school no more, and it's all your fault, and we don't like you no more." "Yeah," added Little Man in agreement. TJ stared down at Christopher John, not believing that he had said that. Then he laughed uneasily. "I don't know what's gotten into folks. Everybody's gone crazy." "Look," Stacy said, stopping. "First you run off with the mouth to them Wallaces, and now you blaming little Willie for what you done? Why don't you just admit it? It was you." "Hey, man," TJ exclaimed, grinning his easy grin. But then, finding that grin and the smooth words no longer worked, his face dropped. "Oh, all right. So maybe, what if I did say something about Ms. Logan? I can't even remember saying nothing about it, but if both little Willie and Clarence said I did, then maybe I did. Anyways, I'm real sorry about your mama losing her job," and all of us, including Claude, stared distastefully at TJ and walked away from him. "Hey, wait, I said I was sorry, didn't I?" he asked, following us. "Look, what's a fellow got to do anyway? Hey, y'all, look, this here's still old TJ. I ain't changed. Y'all can't turn on me just 'cause—" "You the one turned, TJ," Stacy called over his shoulder. "Now leave us alone. We don't want no more to do with you." TJ, for the first time, comprehending that we were no longer his friends, stopped. Then, standing alone in the middle of the road, he screamed after us, "Who needs y'all anyway? I've been tired of y'all always hanging around for a long time a while now, but I've been too nice to tell ya. I should have known better. What I look like having a bunch of little kids round all the time, and me here 14, near grown." We walked on, not stopping. "Got me better friends than y'all. They give me things and treat me like I'm a man, and they white too." His voice faded into the wind, and we left him, and we heard no more.